In 1874, in the United States, a 10-year-old child changed the history of children's rights forever. Her name was Mary Ellen Wilson. Before her, there was no law allowing the state to remove a child from an abusive home. Animals had more legal protection than children. Mary Ellen's case changed everything. Mary Ellen was born in March 1864, in New York. Her mother, Frances Connor, was an English laundress who had immigrated to the United States in 1858. Her father, Thomas Wilson, was an Irishman who worked shucking oysters at a hotel. They married in April 1862, shortly after Thomas was drafted into the Union Army. In early 1864, Frances gave birth to her daughter, whom she named Mary Ellen. But tragedy struck quickly. In the same year, Thomas Wilson died in combat, leaving Frances a widow alone with a newborn baby. Frances, forced to return to work, placed Mary Ellen in the care of a woman for $2 a week. When Frances lost her job and stopped paying, the child was turned over to the city's Department of Charity and taken to Blackwell's Island, a place where, according to reports, 2/3 of abandoned children died before reaching maturity. A couple named Thomas and Mary McCormack, who had lost their 3 children to illness, decided to adopt Mary Ellen. Shortly after, Thomas McCormack died, and the widowed Mary remarried a man named Francis Connolly. From then on, Mary Ellen's life became a living hell. For years, she was a victim of frequent and brutal beatings by Mary Connolly. Mary Ellen suffered regular beatings with a rawhide whip. She was burned, hit with scissors, fed insufficiently, forced to sleep on the floor, without warm clothes for the cold. She was locked alone in a dark room, forbidden to go outside, except at night in the backyard, and was forced to do heavy labor. In 1873, Etta Angel Wheeler, a Methodist social worker who worked in the poorest neighborhoods of New York, heard disturbing reports about a child suffering abuse in a tenement in Hell's Kitchen. Determined, she went to investigate. What she found shocked her deeply: a pale, thin child, barefoot, wearing a tattered dress on a bitterly cold day, with marks of physical abuse on her frail arms and legs. Etta Wheeler went to the police, but they said they could not act without a court order. She turned to charity organizations, but none had the legal authority to intervene in a family's life. In a cruel irony of the time, there were laws to protect animals from cruelty, but none authorizing intervention to rescue a child from an abusive home. Then Etta Wheeler had a bold idea. She sought out Henry Bugg, the famous animal rights activist and founder of the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, the ASPCA. Bugg, moved, told Wheeler, a very definite testimony is needed to justify interference between a child and those who claim guardianship. Could you not send me a written statement so that I may weigh the evidence? Wheeler sent the report immediately. Bugg, convinced, wrote to his attorney, Elbridge T. Gerry, there is no time to lose. Instruct me on how to proceed. What happened next would reshape American jurisprudence. Elbridge Gerry, a brilliant attorney and grandson of a signer of the Declaration of Independence, faced a monumental challenge. There was simply no legal framework for removing a child from parental custody on grounds of abuse. The common law tradition viewed children as essentially the property of their fathers, and the state had almost no authority to interfere in family matters. Gerry had to find a way to force the courts to act without any existing child protection statute. Gerry's solution was as ingenious as it was unprecedented. He turned to Section 65 of the Habeas Corpus Act, a law originally designed to free prisoners who were being held unlawfully. Gerry argued that Mary Ellen was, in effect, being held as a prisoner by the Connollys. She was not their biological child, she had never been legally adopted, and therefore they had no lawful authority over her. The petition alleged that Mary Ellen was being held illegally by the Connollys, who were neither her natural parents nor her legal guardians, and that she was at risk of irreparable harm. This legal argument was revolutionary. By framing Mary Ellen as an unlawfully detained person rather than an abused child, Gerry bypassed the entire problem of family privacy. He wasn't asking the court to judge whether Mary Ellen's treatment was cruel, he was asking the court to recognize that the Connollys had no legal right to detain her at all. It was a masterstroke of legal strategy. On April 9, 1874, Bugg and Gerry appeared before Judge Abraham R. Lawrence of the New York Supreme Court. The courtroom was packed. The petition was read aloud, and for the first time in American legal history, a court was being asked to remove a child from a private home not because of poverty, not because of crime, but because of cruelty. Judge Lawrence listened carefully, examined the evidence, and then did something extraordinary: he issued the warrant. For the first time in American history, a child would be removed from an abusive home by force of law. The implications of this ruling were enormous. Judge Lawrence had established, even if implicitly, that the state had a legitimate interest in the welfare of children, and that this interest could override the traditional authority of guardians. It was the first crack in the legal wall that had treated children as private property rather than human beings with rights. The legal precedent set that day would echo through courtrooms for generations, eventually forming the foundation of modern child protection law, foster care systems, and juvenile courts across the United States and, later, the world. On that same day, April 9, 1874, Mary Ellen was removed from the house and taken to court. Without adequate clothing, she was wrapped in a carriage robe by the police. The journalist Jacob Riis, who was present, wrote one of the most striking phrases in history: "I saw a child brought in, at the sight of which men wept aloud. And I heard the story of little Mary Ellen told, that stirred the soul of a city and awakened the conscience of a world that had forgotten." Mary Ellen testified in chambers, and her testimony, reproduced by the newspapers of the time, is heartbreaking. She said, "My father and mother are dead. I don't know how old I am. I have no recollection of a time when I did not live with the Connollys. Mama had the habit of whipping and beating me almost every day. She used to hit me with a twisted rawhide whip. The whip always left purple marks on my body. I now have purple marks on my head made by Mama, and also a cut on my forehead made by a pair of scissors. I have no recollection of ever having been kissed by anyone. I have never been kissed by Mama. I have never been taken on Mama's lap and caressed or petted. I never dared to speak to anybody, because if I did, I would be whipped." But the legal significance extended far beyond one conviction. The case had proven that the courts could act, that the law could protect children, and that society had a moral and legal obligation to its most vulnerable members. It opened the door to a new field of law, child protection jurisprudence. Within months, legislators in New York and other states began drafting bills to formalize the authority that Judge Lawrence had exercised. The concept of parens patriae, the state as parent of the nation, which had existed in theory for centuries, was finally being put into practice for abused children. After the conviction, Mary Ellen was initially placed in a home for delinquent girls. Etta Wheeler, dissatisfied, fought to have the girl removed from there. She succeeded, and Mary Ellen was taken to live with Etta's mother and sister in a town upstate New York. There, she finally found a safe home. But Mary Ellen's case did not end with her rescue. In December 1874, Henry Book, Elbridge Gerry, and James Wright founded the New York Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, the SPCC, the first child protection organization in the world. Its mission was to rescue children from cruelty, abandonment, and neglect. In its first year, the SPCC investigated more than 300 suspected cases of child abuse. The concept spread rapidly. By 1880, there were already 37 similar societies in the United States. By 1902, there were 161. The SPCC also spurred legislative reforms, including child labor laws and the creation of the first New York Children's Court in 1901. By the end of the 19th century, the idea of child protection was already an integral part of the American legal system. Mary Ellen grew up and lived a quiet life in upstate New York. At age 24, in 1888, she married Louis Schutt. They had 2 daughters together. One of them was named Etta, in honor of the woman who saved her. Louis already had 3 children from a previous marriage, and later the couple adopted an orphan girl. Mary Ellen helped raise all of these children. She died on October 30, 1956, at the age of 92, leaving behind 2 daughters, 1 adopted daughter, 3 stepchildren, 3 grandchildren, and 5 great-grandchildren. The case of Mary Ellen Wilson is remembered as the first chapter of children's rights. A girl who, with her courage to testify, awakened the conscience of a nation. A determined social worker, Etta Wheeler, who did not give up when all doors closed. An animal rights activist, Henry Book, who extended his compassion to human beings. And an attorney, Elbridge Gerry, who used a forgotten law to write a new page in history. Thanks to them, today there are laws, agencies, and systems dedicated to protecting the most vulnerable children. Mary Ellen Wilson was not just a victim. She was the spark that ignited a worldwide movement. They chose to act, and in doing so, they created the legal and moral framework that billions of children have benefited from ever since. Today, in virtually every country on Earth, there are laws protecting children from abuse. There are social workers, child protective services, foster care systems, family courts, and international conventions, all tracing their origins, directly or indirectly, to a cold April morning in 1874, when a small girl wrapped in a carriage robe stood before a judge and asked not to be beaten anymore. Mary Ellen Wilson was not just a victim. She was the spark that ignited a worldwide movement. And her name deserves to be remembered.